Wal and the Gadigal people as the traditional owners of the land, traditional custodians of the country on which I work. I acknowledge the continuing connection to land, waterways and community. I pay my respects to elders, their elders, and all Kulin Nations people, past, present and emerging. These were the first storytellers of this land. And that last is a quote from Leah Kaminsky's website. And tonight we welcome a wonderful storyteller, a woman who's written books, poetry, anthologies, and it's just an honour to welcome you to what Brenda's been calling a spotlight. So this is our spotlight series, and in the terms of the series, you're our first guest. And I want to start with a question about just how prolific your work is. I talked about poetry. Your prose is like poetry. I tried to count the books. So there are fiction books. There are books that come out of our medical lives, and there are anthologies and newspaper articles, magazine articles, and you've been an editor of MJA Poetry. My first question, Leah, is how do you juggle all that and still be a clinician? How do you juggle motherhood, clinical work, and that enormous oeuvre of books?
Oh, Marjorie, thank you. I'm so honoured. And yeah, look, at the moment, I'm mainly writing shopping lists and forgetting what I've gone to the supermarket for. But I think the house is a mess. Carmel Bird was she's a wonderful Australian writer. She was one of my first fiction teachers. And she said, if you want to become a writer, give up the housework. I think that was the best advice. You can see the mess behind me. It's clean, but it's not, you know. For me, it all just goes, it feeds, everything feeds each other. Like my writing feeds my medicine feeds my writing. I got into, this is true confessions, don't tell my patients. I got into medical school on my English and French marks. I almost failed chemistry, scraped it in. So I've always been a very strong humanities student. And I remember, you know, the teachers telling me when I said I wanted to do science and get into medical school, trying to discourage me. But I was completely obsessed that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to work with human beings and try and make a difference there. Not really answering your question, but I mean, we all do lots of things.
We do.
I've got a friend who goes to the Sunshine Singers and then she does, 20 laps of the pool. And then we all have our passions and our things that we love to do. For me, the writing has just fed my soul and reading, and always has done. My first poem was in grade 3.
Yeah.
And I've always threatened to recite it, but I've actually forgotten. It was called The Royal Beetlebug. And so that was my first published poem in the school magazine. Still proud of it.
You're just about to bring out a book of poetry, aren't you? Tell us about
I've come back to poetry. Not that I ever left it, but yeah, I've got a small book coming out on the 1st of October called Disorders of the Blood. And it was inspired by an old hematology textbook that I came across in an op shop from, I think it's 1939. And I've followed the chapter headings of that book and kind of grouped the poems around that. And that's been a lot of fun, just working with the whole theme of blood.
So I've read some of your fiction, and your prose is very poetic anyway. So looking forward to your poetry.
Thank you so much. That's actually been used against me by one top publisher who published one of my books and then afterwards asked me about whether I was writing a novel. And I sort of told her about the novel that I was working on. That was The Hollow Bones at the time, my second novel. And she looked at me and sort of, it was about a Nazi ornithologist and scientist, true, sort of ripping off a true story. And she looked at me, and the moment I said that there was a voice there was a character that was in the voice of a stuffed baby panda in the Natural History Museum in Philadelphia, you could see her eyes glaze over. And she said to me, Leah, do you know the problem with your books? And I said, yes, what? And she said, the sentences are too beautiful. And I thought, thanks. She's telling me I'm literary and it doesn't sell, I think.
Well, you won prizes.
It's all about language, Marjorie. I just, for me, language is culture. And my latest book, Doll's Eye, very much deals with that at several levels.
So one of the things is I came to your writing through some of your anthologies. And so tell me a little bit about the one you wrote for the environmental movement with Meg Keneally.
I've got them here. You'll probably see them back to front though, won't you? Yes. It's the most beautiful book.
Animals Make Us Human. That was my first experience. And
that was just a joy to work on. It was in the middle of lockdown, and it was the time of the horrible bushfires, 2019. And I've always loved animals. I'm passionate about conservation. I've got two daughters who are ecologists and conservationists. And the truth is that I applied for vet school and didn't get in and got into medical school instead. Are we allowed to say that?
On your English and French.
So, gosh, it makes it sound like I don't like being a doctor, but I actually love it. So this anthology, I was sitting here and the house in Melbourne was filling up with smoke from bushfires. And I thought, I've got to do something. I'm in lockdown. I've got to do something. And I pitched to my publisher at Penguin, came up with the idea of doing a fundraiser for the Australian Wildlife Conservancy and oh gosh, I've forgotten their name. Isn't that terrible? The Australian Marine Conservation Society. And I thought if we can get people from all walks of life to write a love letter to an Australian animal and get photographers, then maybe we could put this anthology together. And Penguin were great. Everyone was so passionate about the idea. I mean, we were all, in lockdown and being driven nuts. And it came together very quickly and the passion was extraordinary. And we had a list. I rang up Meg Keneally, who I know, and I said, Meg, I can't do this on my own. Can you help me? And she was so excited. So I'd come home from the clinic, peel off my PPE, and there'd be these extraordinary stories in my inbox and photos of Australian animals. I mean, some of them are just, I don't know if you can actually.
Oh, I've got the book, and
you've got the book. I was just going to sort of flick.
It's one. I've got the book, and I think it's wonderful.
There's a piece by Geraldine Brooks, which is an ode to the huntsman's spider in her bedroom.
Oh, marvelous! Thank you for showing us.
And we got, we wanted to have a very strong Indigenous representation. We wanted conservationists. We wanted terrific writers. We had people like Paul Kelly and Sean Tan and Graham Simpson, Tom Keneally, Keridwen Dovey. I mean, it was just, I was like a kid in a lolly shop.
Geraldine Brooks.
Yeah. And all I did was ask. It's called chutzpah in Yiddish, like absolute gumption. But I thought, you know what? You don't ask, you don't get. And everybody was thrilled and everybody contributed. Bruce Pascoe. I had such a richness there could have been more. Anyway, I'm raving. Did I enjoy it? Yeah. And we raised quite a lot of money for the organisation. So that was just such a feel-good thing to do.
Yeah. No, I mentioned that one first because it's the one that brought me to your writing.
Oh, really? That's exciting.
There is and then I went on to the Pen and the Stethoscope. So the Pen and the Stethoscope was another group of extraordinary writers.
Again, everyone in all the interviews I did, people say, how are you a doctor and a writer? And I
That was
wondered,
my first question.
what's so special about doctors and writing? And I thought, I'm sure we could put together an anthology of plumber writers. Like, what's so special about it? So I sort of went to interrogate that. And that was also a fundraiser for the Starlight Foundation. At the time, my son had been paralysed with a terrible episode of transverse myelitis, and the Starlight Foundation were fantastic. So again, it was a project I just wanted to give back. And again, I just got this list of doctor writers who I'd always admired and wrote to them and said, I'm putting this together. Would you be interested in contributing? And everyone said yes. So I had Oliver Sacks, Atul Gawanda,
Fugazi.
Irvin Yalom, Robert J. Lifton. I mean, the cast is extraordinary. Abraham Verghese, Danielle Ofrey. We had some locals, Peter Goldsworthy, Jacinta Halloran, Nick Earls. It was a stunning thing to do. And Jerome Groupman, who was writing for the New Yorker, wrote the introduction, which was so poignant because he was talking about
it's a beautiful introduction.
Right. Yeah. And he talks about checking your own emotional temperature on the page, taking your mask down when you leave the clinic. And in the writing is where your heart and your soul pour out. And I think what I learned from putting that together was, everyone says to me, does being a doctor make you a better writer? And I don't care about that. I think being a reader and perhaps trying to understand things through my writing, hopefully will make me a better physician, a better healer, a better listener, because we're in our clinics and what are we doing all day? We're listening to subtext. You're listening to what's not being said as much as what is being said. And I think a true healer or medical practitioner really needs to tease out, put the puzzle together and understand what's going on underneath it all. And that's what you do as a reader and as a writer too.
Yeah, I agree. Tell the others about your own piece in that pen and stethoscope, because that was a beautiful piece of writing too.
That actually began, it's a piece called Tahiri, and it came out of my experience. I worked for 10 years as the doctor at the Baha'i World Centre in Haifa.
Yes, I've been there. That's an extraordinary building, and I don't want to go to that part of the world at the moment, but
no.
the Baha'i Centre in Haifa is a beautiful building.
Yeah, so that was many years ago, but a lot of my patients were Persian Baha'is, so people who'd fled the Iranian regime. And one of the women had fled Iran, Tehran, and her husband, who was on the, sort of one of the high up people in the Baha'i community in Tehran, had been imprisoned and executed. So that was, that was about her and what she had given me and what she had taught me. It's heavily disguised and reworked. And that went on to form a very strong basis of my first novel called The Waiting Room.
It's a good segue. The waiting room is really very important for us to talk about. Keep going.
Oh, God.
Well, it's your first prize winner, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's The Waiting Room. So that took about 30 years to write. I say 10, but it's really 30. It started, I had won a competition. I was at Monash Medical School, and when I was 21, I won a short story writing competition with the student something or other. And I had sat down, my mother had just died when I was 21, and I sat down to write her story. And at 21, you know what you like. You don't really want to hear about your parents. My mother was a sole survivor of her family. She was 21 when she was liberated from Bergen-Belsen and Auschwitz. So there were lots of stories that she had told me, but I wasn't really listening, just wanting to be a, cool Aussie chick, blend in. And so I thought, well, after she died, I would write her story. And I sat down, I wagged lectures and I took a week off uni, and got my exercise book out and all the rest of it. And I ended up, after about an hour, filling 3 pages wildly. And then I had nothing else to write. I was so mortified and so ashamed that I just didn't, and my mother hadn't recorded any of her stuff. It was before they were doing testimonies. So the rest, the waiting room grew out of that, and it was trying to do a what if, like to recreate what if this was my mother's story. So I took, real snippets, which I do in most of my books. There is reality based to a lot of the novels, but then I sort of go off and fictionalize things and create worlds of what I imagine may have been. So it's really about, and this came from Geraldine Brooks too, it's about haunting. So it's about the presence of the dead in our lives. And I've got a lot of those. And so I remember listening to Geraldine Brooks' Boyer lectures one year, many years ago, and she was talking about an old Norse word, hemta, Heimta, which loosely translated does mean haunting or ghosts, and it also means to bring you home. And that it really struck me that the hauntings and paying attention to the past and to my heritage and to where I've come from actually bring me home to myself. And so that was the sort of genesis for the waiting room, but it took a long, long time. I ended up, after I finished medical school, I went back and did writing courses, and I did course in professional writing and editing, and then I went back and did a Bachelor of Arts in literature and creative writing, and then I went to the Iowa Writers Workshop, and then I went to NYU, and then I ended up doing a master's at Vermont College of Fine Arts in fiction, a remote, it was a toing and froing, and that's where I was introduced to a beautiful, quiet Southern gentleman, this neurotic, crazy Jewish woman from Melbourne. I thought, you're not going to get me. And boy, did he get me. He got ghosts. They call them haints in the South. And he really brought me back to my ghosts. And so the main character in the waiting room is a mother figure who haunts her doctor daughter, who happens to be working at the Baha'i World Centre. It's a long-winded way of telling you it took ages to write.
Well, I recommend it to everyone. It's a wonderful book.
Thank you so much.
And a prize winner too, was it not?
Yeah, I was very excited. I won the Voss Literary, which was just that's for good sentences.
Yeah.
But it's very much about, I think, also it's the main character is a female doctor from Melbourne and dealing with her patients on a very fraught day. But I think, I'm trying to explore also at a personal level what the costs are of our profession as well. And the waiting room, very much about how we spend our lives waiting for life to happen and kind of treading water.
Oh, thank you for that. It's a wonderful book.
Thanks,
The other one that I'd like to explore with you is the extraordinary story of the Damiani family.
Yeah, very close to my heart, that one. I'm doing show and tell here, cracking the code.
Yeah, that's a profoundly interesting story. And
well, it was written in 2009, I think, if I'm not, let me just double check. Oh, sorry, first published in 2015, but the story started way back. So the Damianis, and I wrote it with them, so I've got permission to talk about it. An extraordinary couple who came to me for a 6-week baby check for their little boy, Massimo, and I noticed that he had a very prominent natal cleft with some pits at the base, and sent him off for some tests, and he had a tethered cord. I don't have to explain this. We're all medical, is this right?
I don't think so, no.
So I sent him off to the Royal Children's, and he was being monitored for his tethered cord. And then, he was developing well and all his milestones and everything. And then on his first birthday, he suddenly, all his milestones started dropping off, and he couldn't walk anymore, and he was having trouble eating and talking. And he had, at that stage, they didn't know what was wrong with him. And he had eventually, he had a leukodystrophy, but an unclassified, undiagnosed one. And so in those days, you know, that was it. That was a death sentence. And Stephen Damiani, who's a brilliant IT man and quite an entrepreneur, came to me one day, and, you know, he'd been reading lots of articles and really doing a lot of real research, not just, you know, Google research.
Dr. Google.
Yeah, exactly. And said to me, look, I've figured it out. All we need to do, and this is back in 2009, I think, all we need to do is get my DNA blueprint, get Sally, my wife, get Massimo, and then we just cut out the white noise and we'll figure out what it is. And I'm like, you're talking about data that goes to the moon and back, you know, 1 billion times. Like, it just doesn't exist. Well, then I'll make it happen. And I asked if I could write an article about this. Oh, no, sorry. No. I'd written an article for a magazine in Brisbane called Griffith Review. Yeah. And I'd had dinner with the editor who'd been helping me. And I was telling her this story about the Damianis. And I said, you don't happen to know a computer geek that, you know, is interested in working on this kind of idea of my patients? And it so happened that her husband was an American postdoc up in Queensland at the Brain Institute. And she told him about it. And I put him in touch with Stephen, and the two of them started working together in his spare time. And his name's Ryan Taft. He's an absolute genius. He now is sort of chief scientific officer at Illumina in the States. But in his spare time, he and Stephen literally cracked the code. They figured out what the genetics were of this illness. And now, and with funding and all the rest of it, they started up a database around the world. They got specialists involved. And now it is the way of diagnosing rare genetic illness in neonates. So in those days, it was unheard of. And this IT geek just came up with the idea that everyone was, you know, I was getting letters from specialists saying, send the guy to a psychiatrist. And he did it. And I was just so fortunate to be, you know, I was part of it just in terms of the machinations, but I didn't understand all the science of it. And then, you know,
you're the one that drew everyone together.
Yeah, well, I was a bit of a matchmaker. I was kind of the door bitch, just, you know. But that was just such a privilege. And then I got invited over to Illumina, where they had this huge conference about it, and had my DNA mapped, my genome. It was one of the first. So it was a very exciting project. Sadly, Massimo died a few years ago. He lived till he was 11, which is more than anyone would give him. But as a result of that, Stephen and Sally also pioneered a kind of you know, they were one of the pioneers of surrogacy. And so their twin boys, who are now older, were born with a surrogate mother, because they, you know, it was thought it was the mitochondrial DNA that was responsible. So, and now, you know, like dominoes, there were kids around the world diagnosed with the type of leukodystrophy that Massimo had, and treatment was initiated early. So it's had, you know, we call it the Massimo effect, because it's had that many impacts around the world in this field. It's been extraordinary. There was an Australian Story episode done about the family too.
I tried to find that, but
I'm not sure it's
an amazing story and a wonderful book again.
Yeah, well, it was just one. I wrote it with them. I wasn't going to write it just myself. I wanted to give them the voice in that as well. Yeah, that was such a privilege. It was just extraordinary.
Just whilst we're taking a breath, does anyone else want to ask a question of Leah?
Sorry, I'm blabbing.
Anyone else? You know, I can talk the leg up an iron stool too. If anyone else would like to ask a question. So the other one that I had on my list is the we're all going to die. Some of the things that you've written about medicine.
I don't have that actually with me, but yeah, that was, stop me if I'm ranting, but that was one day I woke up.
Leah, we want you to rant.
I had a fellow called Merv, who was my lovely old patient, and he lived alone with his pet lamb and his duck, and gorgeous fellow. And I used to do home visits. And I don't know why, we sat down one day and he was getting old and getting on. And I said, do you ever think about dying, Merv? And he looked at me, rasping with his emphysema and all the rest of it. And he goes, nah, doc, if I thought about dying, I'd die 1,000 deaths a day. And I left there and I was thinking, I just, like a lightning bolt, I thought, my God, I'm terrified of death. I am absolutely terrified of death. And here I am, working in a profession where it's you're the pizza chef with the pizza dough. Like, it's all around us. And if I'm not comfortable thinking about it and talking about it, then how am I projecting that to my patients? So for me, that was a bit of a watershed moment, in that I decided I'd get on my middle-aged goth girl and turn around and face it. And I did it in a very kind of adventurous way. I didn't really want to go.
I think you did it in a very joyful way.
Well, I tried to. It was actually, I was a bit terrified, but I applied for a residency at the Morbid Anatomy Museum in Brooklyn, which had just opened. And it was a kind of crazy place. I've written articles about it, with lots of Victoriana and memento. And
I visited there in 2019.
Are you serious?
Absolutely.
So you know what I'm talking about. It's crazy. There's stuffed animals. There's two-headed.
I love weird museums. I love weird museums.
Well, it's closed now, but so I was writer in residence there. I mean, so I'd go down to taxidermy classes and all sorts of things you'd never catch me dead doing. And it was fabulous. And there was also, at the Met at the time, there was an exhibition of Victoriana attitudes to death and dying and mourning. So that was my intro. And then I thought, I'm just going with it. I went and interviewed daredevils that were, putting their lives at risk. I went and interviewed funeral directors and death doulas. I live around the corner from a cemetery I'd never been into, and I went walking there and found, Sir John Monash's grave, and talked to the grave diggers and the curator. And it was actually talking to these people who deal with death on a day-to-day basis was incredibly uplifting. It was liberating. It was, I think for me, putting death as a focus in front of you, knowing that our lives are finite and not pretending that they're not. It's called A Joyful Book About Death because for me, it's about embracing life. It's about, we're all going to die. That's what it's called. Let's not pretend we're not. What are we going to do with this time on earth? What are we going to do that really matters? And for me, it was a personal journey I'm still not, I don't want to die. I'm still not comfortable with it, but I can now talk to patients about it. I can bring up the subject. I can discuss it. Before I'd sort of, if I'd seen, a shadow on the ovary on the ultrasound, I go, oh, look, there's just a little something there. I might just refer you to a gynecologist and not have the discussion that, gee, it could be something. I just sort of fob it off because I couldn't deal with it. And that's shameful. I was so embarrassed by that, and that needed to be addressed. So I did it publicly.
That sort of circles back to how much your writings taught you about medicine and how much medicine's taught you about writing.
Well, I hope so. I think they definitely dovetail, and I feel privileged. I mean, God, we sit in an office day in, day out, and people bring us their stories. People bare their hearts. People tell us the most extraordinary things. And, I feel so privileged. I don't think I could, I'm always running late. I could never be that 6-minute in-out doctor, nor do I want to be.
I don't talk about time management. I talk about managing complexity.
Oh, I love that. So, I drive a 25-year-old car, but that doesn't matter. The other day I had a woman come in and tell me about her mother who's turning 86, and they wanted to throw a party for her. And she said, over my dead body. And she goes, Mum, we're throwing you a party whether you want one or not. What are you going to wear? What frock are you going to wear? And the mother said, I'm going to get myself a frock with embroidered crystalline tears on it. And I thought, oh my God. Just, literally clunk. It's joyful and it's poignant, and it's, I don't know, it really gives me meaning in my life, in that, it's a privilege enough to be hearing these stories. You also have to ask for them, and you have to listen for them, as you know.
Yeah, the key is listening, isn't it?
Oh, giving them the space, absolutely. And it's really hard because I like to talk. So I have to sort of, bite my tongue for that first 6 minutes and let them talk.
6 minutes. Yeah, that's
or however long you're supposed to. How long is it? Don't we interrupt within 30 seconds or something?
Apparently, yeah.
Yeah. So for me, distilling that afterwards on the page is so uplifting and rewarding, and I just love it. I don't know what else I'd do. I'm really bad.
A hand up over here from AFM team account, which must be Brenda. Are you going to talk to us, Brenda?
Sure is, yeah. I'm just reflecting on what you were saying about the stories you hear. I'm also a GP, and the most recent book I've read through was Peter Goldsworthy's most recent one. He seems to let his patients know when he's going to feature them in his writing. Do you tell your patients that they might appear in a disguised way, or is it distilled so much that that's not necessary?
It's always necessary, but I usually distill, they're a pastiche of 10 different people plus made up ones. If, obviously with, writing about Stephen and Sally Damiani, I had permission from the get-go. If I was going to write about the crystalline tears frock, I would definitely ask my patient. But I don't use any identifying features, and I might change their gender or their age or where they live. The nubbin is there, but I would never betray, well, I'd be sued. I would never morally betray a patient ever.
So do you say during the consult, gosh, this has given me an idea. Would you mind if I use that element in my writing? Or do you keep a record so that should you use it, you can go back and approach them?
It's a very good question. I usually, if it does come up, I will remember who's told it to me because it's stood out so much. And I've been working in the business a long time. I have long-term patients. If I think, there's a nubbin right there and this is a story and I want to pitch this to Hollywood, I'll ask them then and there. Hasn't happened.
I'll say back to Marjorie then.
Thank you. It's a great question though, and it's a moral question.
Lovely question. And Melissa and Bella, do you have any questions for our guest? I just want to remind you of all the books we've been talking about. Melissa, you'd like to ask a question?
Hi, Melissa.
Hi. Don't really have a question. I would just like to say that it's inspiring. I'm, wanting to get into a bit of writing. So thank you for lighting the way. And I'd love to read the book about death because I'm a pathologist. So it's kind of our specialty.
Oh, wow. I interviewed pathologists in the book too. I went back and visited my kind of dissection days and all of that. I just went to town on it.
Melissa, I thought
very brave of you.
I thought you'd be quite interested in this coming book of poetry, as it was inspired by a hematology textbook.
No, I'm more keen to read the book about death.
Well, yeah, go for it. I'd love to hear what you have to say about it.
It's well worth reading. Bella, have you a question?
No, I don't have a particular question. I remember Leah at school. How's that?
Oh my God, heavens.
Are you a couple of years younger than me? And
Oh,
I've always been too busy to stop and actually buy the book and read it. It's sort of, yeah, I must do it. I must do it. And then this opportunity came and I thought, look, I'm going to listen.
oh,
So
thank you,
now
Paula.
I'm motivated to go out and buy one or two.
Aren't you
I'm
gorgeous?
retired, so I've got time.
What did you end up doing?
General practice.
GP. Oh, lovely. Terrific.
And
I
yeah,
think
I know
GPs are
about
great
patients.
writers.
Sorry?
I think GPs are fantastic writers.
I think that I've certainly got a few stories that stand out in my mind, but I doubt that I'll get to write them.
Oh, go for it. Write poems. They're quicker. Not necessarily, actually.
No, I think not.
Yeah. Look, I think, you know, it's that creativity. I just want to go back to medical school if I can for a bit. And I just remember, you know, I was always a very creative kid at school. And, you know, our English teacher, Miss Hall, inspired me to write in Form 3.
Don't remember.
Anyway, I then when I struggled to get through medical school because I wasn't a strong science student, and I developed what I call tunnel vision of the soul. I just had to really kind of narrow down to pass, and it was only I remember I was working as a pediatric resident in Sydney, and I was on Christmas Eve, and I had to do a spinal tap on a little boy, which I wrote a story about. And he turned around to me and he said, "Is this going to hurt?" And I just looked at him, you know, across my mask. I said, "No." I lied because I couldn't deal with it. And after that, I fell apart. Everything that I'd sort of not done during medical school just to get through, which is not read and not write and not do anything creative. Maybe I'd go down to the pub occasionally. Then I dropped out of the pediatric training, and that's when I started writing again and went to NYU and started writing courses and started processing all of that kind of what I call the tunnel vision of the soul through my writing. For me personally, that was a sort of watershed moment for me. And I decided, well, I'm going to do both.
Oh, you've done it well. It's good.
I don't know about well, it had to be done. There was no choice. And I was very privileged in that, you know, I have been published and had a modicum of success, and that's been lovely validation. But I think even if I hadn't been, I have to write. I'm nuts. I'm psycho if I don't write. I guess it's just my way of being in the world and of processing things. And more important than that, I have to read.
Yeah.
It's
What do you
better
like
for
to
you than a
read?
therapist.
Sorry?
Much better for you than having to see a therapist.
What do you like to read, Leah?
Oh gosh, things with beautiful sentences.
Yeah. You write beautiful sentences.
I love literary fiction, and I love the Irish. Give me Anne Enright, give me Kevin Barry.
Conto.
They're just brilliant. They've got such soul. I'll read anything that's beautiful. I'm not a huge crime fiction or kind of, you know, commercial fiction. I'm a bit of a snob, but I just love stumbling across. I think books have to come to you also. You know, I'll go into the library or the bookshop and just browse around, and it'll come. You know, I'll just find something, and it's the right book for that moment. Yeah, and you know, I also grew up speaking Yiddish.
Yeah.
To my shame, because my grandfather only spoke Yiddish, and that's where Doll's Eye kind of originated from, my latest novel that came out last year, which is again about language. So I reread a lot of you know, I was so embarrassed to speak Yiddish, but you kind of spend your adult life chasing what you ran away from as a child, and came back and read the original Yiddish writers like Basheva Singer.
Did you read it in Yiddish?
Yeah.
Well done. Which one?
I can't remember. There were about 3 of them, but there were, you know.
But Basheva Singer, the Nobel Prize winner, or his brother?
No, Bashevis singer.
Okay.
But this story, Doll's Eye, again, I'd carried with me since I was 15, and I'd met a friend of my father's who was in the Australian Employment Corps. There were a bunch of refugees that had come out before the war, and they were put on the switching line in Tocumwal, the Jews, Italians and Greeks. They didn't know what to do with them. And my father befriended a fellow called Yossel Bergner, who became a well-known painter. And when I was 15, I met Yossel, and he gave me his father's Yiddish manuscripts. His father had come out in 1933 as a Yiddish poet, ostensibly to fundraise for Yiddish schools in Poland, but could see the writing on the wall in Europe, and went to Adelaide, across to Alice on the mail truck, ended up in Burdham, which is the end of the line of the Great Australian Railway they were trying to build to bisect the country, and then got up to Darwin, and he was looking for somewhere to house German Jewish refugees. And he wrote a diary of his trip. So Yossel gave this to me when he was 15 with the photos that he'd taken, and said, you need to write this story. So since, again, I carried this with me since I was 15, didn't know what to do with it, and tried different iterations, and it just didn't sit right. Also because of my growing awareness of, you know, I worked in Aboriginal health, and you know, the land that was being ignored, the traditional owners. So I came to it through a partly fictionalized story of a Nazi experiment in Germany, which was taking place before the war, looking at eye color, changing eye color and trying to Aryanize eye color. And they would take Sinti and Roma people who had a very strong genetic trait of heterochromia, and try and hideous experiments done through the Planck Institute and a woman called Karen Magnuson, and trying to change eye color. So I took that story and fictionalized that whole side of it in Germany, and had a woman with heterochromia run away from Germany, end up in Burdham, in this little tiny town. And guess who she meets? She meets the Yiddish poet that actually exists, that I've fictionalized as well. And they are an unlikely couple in this very strange town that was a small but very prominent town in its day. And I actually, between lockdowns, did a road trip there, and was so extraordinarily welcomed by the traditional owners, the Yangman people. There's 49 of them left now. And so and they showed me around and welcomed to country, and taught me a lot about the land there. Because I would not write this book without their permission. I just could not write a book that was set in country that wasn't, you know, okayed by them. And that brought up the whole idea of language, and the importance of language, and how all the big languages now are cannibalizing the smaller ones. So for me personally, that was Yiddish. But, you know, as we know, there was so many languages in this country that don't exist anymore. And the Yangman were very much representative of that. And it was just a very sad, but very, very, very uplifting time. And so that book is really written in honor of those people. And yeah, again, you know, a professor of endangered languages is a colleague of mine, and he called me up from Darwin. He revitalized the Barngala language in South Australia, and then went up and is working on the Larrakia. And he said, I've got a car, I've got a truck, come up. And I said, we're between lockdowns, I'm going to get stuck there. He goes, just come. So I went up, and we spent a week just, you know, driving around and meeting people, and it was extraordinary. It was just extraordinary. So each of the books is sort of, you know, one book washes up on the shore of the next. And I think Anne Michaels said that I should attribute that. Sorry. And then jumping back a book. Sorry.
Where to from here?
The Hollow Bones is also, you know, I think as a medical person, I feel a moral obligation to interrogate, you know, our lot were up there in all of the atrocities, and I want to know where would I go wrong. So I took a scientist, a real scientist, Ernst Schaefer, that I stumbled across, who was a Tibetan ornithologist and an animal lover, and he got dragged into Himmler's crazy pseudo-scientific schemes of trying to find the origins of the Aryan race, and leads a team of scientists and doctors to Tibet to try and find the original Aryans. And it's based on a platform that the Third Reich adopted called Welteislehre, which is world ice theory. And it was a scientific platform of the Third Reich, if you Google it, that the Earth orbits around the moon, and the moon was icy, and there used to be more moons, and one of the moons, the icy moons, crashed into the Himalayas thousands of years ago, unleashing the Übermenschen, the Aryan race that lived under the snow, and they interbred with the local Tibetans. So these Nazi scientists were going off to do anthropological and scientific studies on this to prove the origins of the Aryan race. And Ernst Schaefer, the scientist, went along and led the exhibition because he wanted to shoot pandas and collect specimens and find Tibetan birds, and it forwarded his career. So he knew it was all crap, but he went along with it, and so many scientists and doctors did. And we're seeing it nowadays too, you know, it's terrifying. So for me, it's more like, you know, but for the grace of God go I, kind of where would I go wrong in this, and what would my moral stance be? And what horrified me the most in, you know, I'd interviewed Robert Lifton, who wrote The Nazi Doctors, extraordinary psychiatrist. And his take, which I think is more horrifying than anything, is that there's no one point where you can say these people went wrong. These people just switched and turned evil. It's more those very, very subtle, oh, that'll be all right, no one will notice decisions, these moral slippages, if you like, that, you know, lead you down into the depths. And for me, I think that as a doctor, I think that needs to be interrogated every single working second of your life. That, you know, are you morally compromising yourself in some way that you're saying is imperceptible and doesn't matter? I know that's probably a complete exaggeration, but I think, I don't think we were taught bioethics when I went through. I hope they do now. But I think it you know, it really should be the very core essence of medical school, if not also narrative medicine, unpacking story. I'm on a rant again. Do you feel that too, Marjorie? Do you?
Oh, I'm just delighted at this conversation. Did I feel those things as well? I've been trying to look for the ethics in medicine in recent years even more deeply. I also went to Monash, and I think we were given a little bit of it at Monash, but I'm not really answering your question, but yes, I felt that too. The Hollow Bones is a wonderful book. I really congratulate you on it.
Gosh, I need to have you as my publicity lady. Thank you.
Well, I
I'm
was
really
going to actually
touched.
make sure that everyone who listens to this knows how to buy your books. So I've just encouraged people to, and I think Brenda will help me. We'll make sure that there's a link to your website, which is just Leah Kaminsky. Is that correct?
Yeah, they're all on there.
Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate it because, you know, part of the, you know, you see a patient, you get paid, even if it's a bulk bill. But as a writer, oh my God, people think you're making $1 million, but you're really not. And if you don't, the horrible part of it is there's the writing and then there's the business of writing, and never the two should meet. But if you don't sell books, then the publishers won't take you. So part
there's
of
a link to your website.
of them is
all the books
necessary
that
evil.
we've talked about and all your other books will appear on that. And I guess for those that, you know, my passion is reading, and I go back to those anthologies as wonderful, wonderful anthologies. And, you know, so far the Hollow Bones and the Waiting Room are worthy of all the prizes you've won.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I really do. There's also libraries. You don't have to buy them.
So I just
Libraries.
do want to assure you that the link is absolutely on the AFMW website. So hopefully we'll get you a few more sales, Leah, because absolutely deserved. Yeah,
I think it would be really lovely. I don't know if any of your members are interested in sort of doing workshops or anything. I'd be thrilled to, you know, if anyone's interested in writing or in talking about it or doing some writing, I'd be more than happy to facilitate that if you're interested. That would be
Well, that's
fun.
really interesting because amongst, I mean, in some of the WhatsApp groups and some of the message groups that we have as members, I know that there are lots of readers, and I'm always swapping stories with people that read widely. So it's something to really keep in mind. So thank you, Leah. Thank you for a
Terrific.
wonderful, wonderful discussion.
Oh,
And-
thank you so much for listening and for the wonderful questions and the warmth that you've received me with. I really appreciate it.
Mm.
absolutely inspirational. I second Marjorie's comments there, and yeah, I don't know how you find the time to, because it takes the depth of thought and the philosophy behind everything you're writing. It's not just the time to put it down on the page, but to just consider it carefully and to work out exactly what you want to say. It's a huge effort, and all not even sure if anyone's ever going to read it.
Yeah,
And
well,
medical
that doesn't
practice.
matter. What matters is that I'm writing it and it, it floats my boat, keeps me semi-sane. Yeah, I just can't not do it. I love knitting
Have
too.
another
Oh,
small
such a great-
decaf soy latte.
Sorry?
Melissa's ordering a small latte.
Oh, I love
Oh,
soy latte.
sorry, guys. I
Decaf,
want to get
thanks.
back to you, but I have to order my small soy latte, decaf, and one of these. What I wanted to say was that we should think about having some book reviews in the AFMW newsletter, specifically about books written by medical women.
Well, what a surprise, Melissa. I've been doing that for the last couple of months.
Yep, we've got a couple. You want to contribute something, Melissa?
I'll have to have a look at Leah's book about death.
Please do. And I'd love to publish your review in the e-bulletin in due course.
You girls are gorgeous. Thank you so much.
No, I heralded this, but we try to finish on time.
Yes.
So there's Leah's website to link to and the wonderful, wonderful books. And, Leah, it's been an honor, a real honor to A, meet
honor's
you, and
mine.
B, to be able to talk about books with you and talk about your books in particular. Thank you,
Thank you
Leah.
so much for having me. It's lovely. And I'll go and have a decaf soy latte now.
Well, I might stop the recording at this point and you can carry on with a little bit of conversation afterwards. Here we go.